Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for this workshop, Making Sustainable Food Systems Education, part of the core curriculum. My name is Dinah Mack. I'm the Education Program Manager at Massachusetts Farm to School. Mass Farm to School is an organization that works to strengthen local farms and fisheries and promote healthy communities by increasing local food purchasing and education at schools. Our statewide work focuses on the professional development to school, staff, and others, technical assistance, network building, and advocacy for farm to school policies. Please keep an eye out for other professional development and networking opportunities outside of this week's conference. And also we have another day of workshops, and we also have some really exciting field trips across the state tomorrow and Friday and Saturday and Sunday. It's not too late to register for them, so check those out. And for now, I'm very excited to introduce the speaker for this session, Anna Seinar, who is a classroom educator at Innovation Academy Charter School. Anna has been a science teacher in Massachusetts schools for 10 years. She currently teaches at the Innovation Charter School in Tingsboro. She's also co-coordinator of her school's Farm to School program and oversees the Farm to School internship with 11th and 12th graders. You might have seen that session. Those were Anna's students. All right, so I'm going to give the floor to Anna. We have Lisa Damon, who is helping us on tech. So if at any point you have issues with technology, please feel free to send her a chat or me. And at any time you have questions about what Anna is sharing, please, by all means, use the chat, and we'll have some time at the end for Q&A where you'll get an opportunity to ask Anna some questions. All right, so Anna, you have the floor.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome so much for coming. As shared, I'm going to present today on making sustainable food system education part of the core curriculum. I am very lucky to get to teach a standalone sustainable food system class as a full year science credit for 11th and 12th graders. And I'd love if other people are doing that type of work. Part of this is I'd like to connect with others, but also just want to share about the journey of how I was able to get to this point and offer this course in this way, and to kind of provide resources and things like that. So if you go to the next slide. Cool. Again, my hopes today are to be able to share resources for you if this is something maybe you're thinking about doing at your school, or maybe you already have a course and are looking for new resources. I'd love to kind of collaborate around that. But as I said, I would really like to connect and build relationships with others who might be doing this work. I kind of feel like there's so many people doing good work, but we're kind of in silos. So I'd love to connect with others. Next slide. So I think basically everything on this slide has already been shared. But again, I teach at Innovation Academy in Tingsboro, Massachusetts. It's really close to Nashua, New Hampshire, actually, and it's a 5 through 12. There's about 800 students. I primarily teach in the high school. I teach life science classes. I've been at Innovation for 5 years. Previously, I taught in Fitchburg for 5 years as well. I teach 10th grade biology, and then I teach a slew of electives. And I also, as shared before, co-coordinate our farm to school program. And I think we're thinking about making, food system education part of the core curriculum. There's lots of ways to go about that. But I think one thing that has made this successful for me is doing the farm to school program, because through that I can build the infrastructure, greenhouses, raised beds, or things like that are used in the sustainable systems class. And then that class can be used to do programming that supports the farm to school program. So I don't think you need a farm to school program necessarily to run a class like this, but I think it certainly has helped. So next page. I'm going to be sharing a lot of resources today, but this might look like a very boring slide, but I think it's really powerful and it's really exciting to me. This is a snippet from our program of study, and it's for our science department. I think for people who are interested in doing something like this might be helpful to take back to admin, or just kind of see how this model might work or is different from your school. But in our school, 9th graders get to take, they have 3 different options you can kind of see here: engineering, environmental science, or green chemistry, all really great classes. In 10th grade, they take biology, which I teach. It's an MCAS class. We do a lot of project-based things there. But then you'll notice for grades 11 and 12 that they take a full year lab science of their choice. So you can kind of see I don't think I have the pointer access, but you can see where it says grade 11 or 12 that there's these full year, oh, thank you. There's these full year classes. So you see anatomy and physiology, chemistry, earth and space science, all these great classes, but then you'll see there in green and blue, sustainable food and horticulture systems. So that's the class. This is the first year I've been able to teach it as a full year science class where students get credit. It's certainly interdisciplinary. But I'm really proud of this because I think we see food systems education everywhere, but I think to have it as a class that students get credit for, that's not an elective, kind of gives it a legit, it makes it legitimate in a way that I don't think we always see. Like, it's worthy of studying and it's worthy of credit for students, and it's that important. So I'm really excited about that. And you can see the course description there if that's helpful for you. We'll talk more about that later. But before we delve in too much, I want to hear from you. I hate talking to like a land of black boxes. So if you go to the next slide. I'm curious from you, you can unmute or you can put in the chat and just kind of pay attention to the subtle differences here because I think they're important. The first one here, and we'll start there, is where does food system education reside in your program currently? What spaces and places do you see it? If you can put stuff in the chat, if you want to unmute, go for it. I'd love to hear from you. So Denise, thank you. So it doesn't have a formal place yet. Yeah. And when I think of like, where does food education sit in our programming, I think it doesn't always have to be formal. I think of, our cafeteria, food education is happening there. Food systems education is there. It's in different places. But yeah, that kind of formal piece for sure. Yeah, in our school, we have a farm to school program. It started at the same time that my movement towards this class started. So it's fairly new, about 3 or 4 years ago. But I know, in our 5th grade science curriculum, they do some things around composting. In some other classes, health classes, they talk about nutrition. So there's all like these little chunks in different places that it's happening, but not in any kind of formalized way. So then I'm curious for anyone, does food system reside in any of your academic curriculum? It doesn't have to be a full standalone class like I'm about to talk about, but is there anywhere that this work is happening? So yeah, before I started this class, it was kind of similar, right? Where there are little pockets of things that were happening. Oh, thanks, Dinah's talking about social studies class, global geography. Oh, that's a perfect place to talk about food systems. Lots of great access points and a lot of cool food labs you could do connected to that as well. Yeah, so as far as I know, and I'd love to connect with other people, I don't know about many places that at the high school level or even younger have like an established curriculum that's connected to food systems education. And so yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. And hopefully you can kind of hear from the model and some of the resources I have, and we can make that move together. So next slide, please. Looks very similar to a slide we looked at a little bit ago, but if you look at the years, this was about 4 years ago. And I think this is important because I think when I hear about projects that people are doing, I often hear about the end. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. How do I get there? And so I think it's important to kind of share the backstory. And this started about 4 years ago. So I have to teach core classes. I teach biology, but our school teachers also have an opportunity to teach electives. They can be 1 semester or 2 semester. You can kind of pitch whatever you want as an idea. And I've always really liked gardening, love science, I love food, and I wanted to teach a sustainable food systems class. And so this is that original pitch that happened. You can see the description here. I'm going to send you a doc in the chat in just a little bit that has all of these years in case that's helpful. But yeah, I just tried it out that year. So just to kind of give you a backstory of how we've grown and what's changed. So if you can go to the next slide. So this year you can see some pictures. It was a small class. It was my first time doing it. The things I love most about it is we were able to go on some field trips to connect to different parts of the food system. I can't wait. Hopefully next year I'll be doing a lot more field trips this year. And last year I've been a little rough in that sense. But where we live near us is a nonprofit that works around food access called Mill City Grows. So we're able to go there. You can see kind of the upper right-hand picture. And we're able to visit a hydroponic plant, little leaf lettuce. And that's an amazing leaf lettuce place. They have delicious lettuce. So we got to go there. So we got to see parts of the food system. And then we just did some really interesting things on the left there. Those are mealworms. We did some mealworm farming to raise them as part of the meal for the future, eating insects. So that was a wild time. And in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see this is a food science lab called Blue's Clues, which looks at bacteria rates in different types of milk over time. So if it's ultra heated and those sorts of things. So it was a good start. At that time, I had taken a PD, it's a good PD, called Science in our Food System and Supply. And so kind of influenced by that, a lot of the stuff in this class was very biotech heavy. And there are some good elements, but it wasn't very cohesive. It was pretty choppy. And also the room that I was in had no sinks. We didn't have a garden at that point at our school. So for any kind of the cooking we did, it's a lot of chopping sort of things. We did some vegetarian sushi and some pesto, and like there are good elements, but it just seemed like we were kind of consuming information a lot of the times and not creating. But it was a good start for that year. So if you can go to the next slide. So I kind of represent that year. My icon for that year is kind of this water bottle. We didn't have sinks, so if we wanted to like wash our hands or do anything, we had kind of containers of water. So we were definitely roughing it there. But things started to change the next year. I got moved to a different room that had sinks. That was a game changer. I can't emphasize that enough. Sinks are helpful. And then through Donors Choose, I started getting equipment. I have some of the things that were helpful. So we got these kind of portable convection stoves and some other gear that kind of changed the program in a direction that I was more excited about. That summer, I took 2 classes that were impactful that I'll talk about a little bit more. One was through Stone Barn Farm out in New York. They had this food ed curriculum, and it really kind of changed my perspective on things. I don't know if I can share my screen with this. I'll try to drop it in. But their perspective was we're going to teach content, for instance, like food taboos and how those shift differently around the world, like what we consider normal and what we wouldn't eat. And then they'd have a cooking component connected to it where they have a food lab. And so for the food taboo unit, they would cook and eat insects and experience that as part of their class. And that was so cool to me, not just cooking with that class, but making sure it was connected and supporting and enriching curriculum. And so that was a real turner for me, which I'll show you in a moment, that we started integrating food labs into our class that were connected to the curriculum. And that just took things to the next level, which I'll show you in just a moment. Yeah, I guess we can go to the next slide. So here's some pictures of what I was talking to you. It was a game changer, as I said. So you can see in the lower left-hand corner, that's masa harina. So again, when we were learning about what might be the menu of the future and sustainable diets, and insects being one of the things that people might eat, we cooked with crickets. And we made these sopes here, and they filled them with a cricket filling, so these bags. So we would connect and explore that way. When we were learning about soil health and agroecology and kind of a diversified agriculture, we made these frittatas, these diversified frittatas that came from a farm that had all of these elements there. So there's like this enriching piece here. When we were learning about the domestication of crops and we looked at beets and things like that, we made beet sliders. So they're learning the content, it's being enriched, but they're working on their community building skills and collaboration. They're getting to taste food, connect to cooking skills and things like that. So it really enriched the curriculum. Some tricky things were that like there's no fridge or dishwasher in that room. So my title here is it was a game changer, but exhausting, because I'd be just spending tons of times hauling things to different rooms, trying to get into the kitchen at school to clean dishes. So it, for me personally, wasn't that sustainable, but it was really cool. Start. Next slide, please. The other thing that started to kind of shape and influence my class is that I took a course from UMass Amherst in their Stockbridge program with this teacher called Catherine Sands, and it was community food systems. And so I had heard about food systems. I'd done stuff with food systems and certainly with social justice, but her entire class from the beginning came from an approach of the 3 E's of sustainability, but really focused on the social equity piece, and the whole thing centered around, if we're not talking about race, if we're not talking about equity, we're not going to do anything to improve our food system. And so that really influenced the direction and shape of my class to have more social justice and equity pieces. I'm a science teacher by training, so this has been an area I've gotten to learn a lot about, and you'll see in the curriculum in a moment what I'm talking about, but hopefully you'll see, and I'm continuing to work on this, is social justice and equity theme. So I don't say my class is a science class, although it's a science credit class. It's an interdisciplinary class that has these pieces in it. Cool. Next page. Okay, so this is the description of the class. We're going to delve into it now that you've kind of seen that build up. And so you can see here, it says garden. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one other thing. That year I offered a totally different class. So I had my food systems elective, and then I had a garden and culinary elective. They're separate classes. There's some overlap here, but they weren't intended to be built together. So you can see here, I won't read it all, but really it's focused on food science, but how we can use that to also look at food history, culture, those sorts of things. So we focused on fermentation, flours and grains, cheeses, and I'll show you in a moment kind of an example of how this connects, but we would learn the science of how to make cheese, for instance, but then we'd look at issues in the dairy industry and things like that, and look at cultural relationships to dairy. So we would look at it through culture, science, and history. So I'll give you an example on the next page. So for instance, here's a project we did, and you'll have links to all of the resources and supporting pieces for this. But we looked at, in our flour and grains unit, we looked at fry bread, which is cooked in many Indigenous communities. You can find them at different powwows and things like that in the United States. But it has kind of a contentious history, or like mixed feelings about it. For some people, it's a food of celebration and identity. And for some people, the ingredients that are used to make fry bread are commodity foods that were kind of forced upon Indigenous communities. And there's a link between a lot of health issues and this type of food. And so, diabetes are at higher rates within our Indigenous communities. And so this tension between this food. So we looked at fry bread as a way to think about food is never just food. There's deeper stories to it. And so we can see here, this is from a student's journal, Rhoda, who was in my class. And I'll show you some more pieces, but this was part of a reflection that said, to kind of get a gist of that class, is we learn everything about the food, its nutritional value, its cultural impact, and how this food began to exist, I think is what it's meant to say there. You have to look at food from different perspectives, not just your own. So it wasn't just a food science class, although we did food science. We learned about gluten formation and all of those things. Which flour do you pick and why, chemical leaveners, and all those sorts of things. But then we took it to these next layers. Next slide. And you can see these are two other students' reflections as part of a curation project, which again, I'll give you a link to. It's one of my favorite projects I did. So I have that for you, where students got to pick, like, what are the 10 most significant, they kind of had to summarize the whole class, most powerful takeaways from them, and kind of do a journey. And basically everyone picked this as one of the ones, is thinking about food politics. And as the next level, then students had to pick a bread from around the world, or a grain product. And they had to do a similar project where they looked at its importance in a culture, what are kind of the political dynamics, like who owns this bread or claims it as their own, and all the kind of the tensions that are within that. So, and then they got to make it. So you can see here for one person's in that lower right-hand corner, they ended up doing challah bread and learning more about that. And so kind of learning about kind of food, history, culture, and those sorts of things. So there are these separate classes, right? Not connected, some overlap, but not connected. Next slide. But then here's where it got really, last year I taught the food science class again, but it was a virtual mayhem. I was dropping off ingredients at people's houses, and microwaves and all sorts of things. It was crazy. But then here's where it got really great. And it said I was going to take a picture of the classroom, but I'm in it, so I figured I'd just show you instead. Was that my principal came to me. I would never have guessed or asked for this. So I think, again, how did these things happen? Like, some of it was support, tons of support from my administration. He asked me, do you want to teach this as a full year lab science? And can we combine these two classes together in some way? It'll be 6 credits. We'll call it Sustainable Foods and Horticulture Systems. We'll move it from an elective. And I like, I couldn't believe, like, I never thought that could be a thing. And I was like, yes, yes, let's do that. And then the other thing that kind of went along with that I'm very blessed and lucky to have is that in our biology class, we had been pushing to get a sink. We didn't have a sink in that room, and we were like, we just want a sink, please, just one sink. And so finally they're like, yes, you can have a sink several years later. And while they were doing that remodel, he set this up for me. So this is the new room I'm in. I moved in here this year. There's a refrigerator you can see there, which was a game changer. A dishwasher, oh my gosh, it's amazing. And some sinks over here. And then I have some storage, and there's outlets and things like that. And that's my current home for this class. And it's really opened up ability for me to do a lot more. So that's the class I'm going to talk about to you now, is kind of the morph of those two classes together, sustainable foods and culinary science. It's a little bit clunky because I'm trying to bring two things together, but I'd love to share with you what I've done so far, and get your thoughts and feedback, and kind of work together in building this, not just here, but beyond this session. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the current class that we have this year. Here's kind of the pitch. This is in the student syllabus, and I will read this one. It says, in this interdisciplinary class, we will explore our connections and strengthen our relationships to food and our communities. We'll investigate how food choices and growing techniques affect people and the environment. During first semester, we'll focus on past, current, and future food systems while cooking several meals connected to our lessons. You'll propose ways to create a more ecologically sustainable and socially just food system. And then during second semester, you'll learn how to grow and care for the edible plants in the raised beds, greenhouses, and indoor plant stands. We'll make bread, cheeses, and other fermented foods to explore food science, culinary history, and culture. And we'll investigate how gardening and cooking can be used as tools to address social inequalities or inequities and environmental challenges. And I love this last line that I have to put this in here. Please note that you will actually be gardening and cooking as a lab component. I can't tell you how many times students in the class are like, wait, what? We're actually cooking and gardening. So yes, that is what the class is called and about. So I always find that humorous. Next slide. So this is what students see. This is kind of the flow for this year. And then I'm going to show you some lessons and activities. And I'm going to drop in a document that hopefully isn't too overwhelming, that has all of them there. So if you want to use them or modify them or whatever you'd like to do with them, if they're helpful. This is semester one. So you can kind of see the flow plan here. And in the first part, and I'll delve more into these a little bit, is really focusing on personal relationships between students, kind of exploring their identity and relationship to food and what a food system is. The majority of my students, it doesn't matter who they are, don't have a strong sense of what a food system is when they come to me. So a lot of it is like, what is this class even about, and what is a food system? Once we have that established, then we go, and you could kind of start wherever. I mean, the history of the food system where do you start? But we start with the history of the food system, and we look at indigenous food systems and foodways, West African food systems and foodways, and how that has, influenced and shaped America. And we look at the history of that, domestication of crops, which I'll show you some projects in a moment. Then we look at our current food system and really look at industrial agriculture and its impacts and how we got to where we are today. And you have to understand the history to understand where we are today. And we look at more diversified and agroecology sort of things. And then we shift to what we call the menu of the future. So, we're in our food system is struggling, and what could it look like? What are our options for that? Kind of connected to that, we look at food waste and food access specifically, and then based off of all of that, they pick some food system change projects or places for leverage to address. So that's kind of what first semester looks like. Next slide. Okay, and just some things I wanted to say, like about how I want to approach this class. I'm still working on this. It's aspirational, progress, not perfection, right? So my hopes with this curriculum are that students find themselves as agents of hope, leadership, and change. I think that is so important right now for students, that they're building community within our class. They're building community within our school, but they're building community also with all of the towns that they're from. Obviously, I'd like them to have some more confidence in their gardening and their cooking and literacy around that. cultivating sustainability and systems thinking mindsets. I know they're not all going to go into food systems and be activists or things like that. But wherever they are, they're connected to the food system and they have choices and they have influence wherever that is, whatever they decide to do. Really important to me is increasing the visibility and amplifying the voices of our diverse food system workers and activists. Providing opportunities for meaningful reflection and connection. You'll see that and what's going to go on. And then this part, I want to go to the other session that's happening right now and learn about this. So I'll watch the video, but increase awareness of jobs in the food system. So this is kind of my approach. So, next slide. Okay. And before I share with you like all of the links, I want to share like all of these things that you're seeing here. These aren't even all of them have influenced my curriculum. So some of it is mine and some of it I have modified from other folks. And so other trainings that I've been to. So there's so many influences on this. So I've done the best I can to kind of cite them where they have or when they've been modified, but just this disclaimer that this is lots of folks that have helped to get this curriculum to where it is right now. And so I'm going to drop it in the chat. And we're going to go through some of them. Hopefully this is helpful. We can pause at any point, whatever is most helpful for you. If you want me to talk about a particular lesson or something like that, or how we use it, I'm going to highlight a few of them, but you'll have access to this link and hopefully I have done it so that you can access every single one of these things and use it however you would like, or not at all. They're there for you. So next slide. Okay, so in unit 1, and again, you can find the assignments for this, but just to give some examples of how I'm trying to do those things that are in my hopes and dreams and aspirations. On day 1, when we start to get to know you and we do different stations, and you'll see this activity in that first page if you want to look at that. But I ask everyone to pick a food that is important to them. To think about how they eat it, what kind of utensils or hands or however that is, what do you need to eat this food with? And they take time to illustrate that. So you can see these here. And then we use these as our placemats for when we eat together during or after cooking labs. So from the very start, we're working on that personal connection to food in a very simple way, but it's very interesting to see how different people approach this. So you can kind of see that student work there to start. Next slide, please. Just some other examples here of kind of how we start by focusing identity and connection to food is they do I am from poems. I got this from Michaela from Mill City Grows. It's also in there. It says it's a very simple template for people, but you can kind of see here from students. I don't explicitly tell them that they have to write about food everywhere, but it does come up in places. You can kind of see these here. I am from the sound of Lowell General Hospital, the smell of the farmland of Dracut, the taste of all things Italian, the touch of the grass in a suburban farm town, people who love food of all kinds, but largely Italian. There's tons of great ones here, but you can see they read these to each other, they share them and kind of start to build community around their identities around food. So we start kind of the intro weeks of school doing these sorts of activities. Next slide. And then we start getting them into thinking about food systems. Like I said, a lot of students have no idea what a food system is. I think this is modified from the Nourish food curriculum and maybe from Shelburne Farms activity that I did, but I have them map out their food system. So again, you'll see this in the doc of resources. You'll see that under where it says like personal food system models. And I just ask them simple questions. I don't even tell them it's a food system really, but just where do you get your food? What happens to it? Where do you store it? Those sorts of things. And they map it out. And all of these sorts of projects, they put them in a Google slide document. They have to comment on each other's and get feedback. But we're kind of like easing into like, what is a food system? So that's there for you. Next slide, please. And then we start to define what a food system is. And I just wanted to define this here. I don't want to make assumptions about where people are and how we're thinking about it in our class. So after we kind of build those, this is just one slide I pulled from some of the resources you'll see. We talk about it's all the steps, all the influences, and all the impacts of feeding people. So we kind of have that layer, like a very simple layer. And then we get a little more complex if you go to the next slide. So now thinking about culturally appropriate food and food security, the ability to have culturally relevant techniques for when you're growing food, have land access and food sovereignty, right? So really thinking about that health, just and prosperous, not just for the planet, but for all food system workers, for all eaters. So this is kind of the context of how we approach our class. Okay, so cooking labs. I can talk about this a little bit today if people want to learn more. This was my biggest learning curve, is what tools to get, how to get everyone in and out of the room safely within the time frame before another class comes, because there are 5 other teachers that use this room. So I got to be efficient in those sorts of things. But some of the ones we looked at for first semester, I'll show here is at the beginning. And you'll see kind of some resources on this again in the slides where it says like 1E, 1F, those sorts of things, as they start cooking labs by learning knife skills. That's one of the biggest fears I have. So we do a lot of knife skills so that we can move through our class and I can feel calm. And so we do a lot. They learn different cutting techniques. You can see here in this activity, this might be from, I can't remember where this is from. It's in there somewhere. It might be Edible Schoolyard. We practice cutting the different techniques and then they put them on here, and then they have this as a picture and visual for them. So whenever you do a lab and it says you need to chop or dice or mince, they can go back to this and they know what kind of cut it's talking about. Oh yeah, we made that cut and it looks like this. And so we use what they practice. This is kind of our first lab, how to be in the cooking space, how do we work as a team, how do we practice good hygiene and all those things, and they make spring rolls. So that's kind of the first cooking lab. Our second cooking lab, when we're looking at indigenous foodways, they make corn tortillas and they make succotash, and that's kind of like a corned bean squash medley. It's very delicious. We also were looking at food sovereignty and indigenous foodways. They try Tonka Bars, which is an indigenous run company out west that's working with buffalo restoration. And so it's a buffalo bar. That's one of the only times we eat meat in our class. Otherwise, the majority of it is vegan and vegetarian first semester, except for the cheese unit that is not vegan, and wild rice and things like that. Another cooking lab we did, and they do these about every other week, cooking lab that's connected to the curriculum. We did black-eyed pea fritters. When I pick recipes, I make sure that they're recipes from folks of that culture, so we can connect to them as well. And so the black-eyed pea fritter ones, and I can pull a book, I can create a book list if it's helpful for anyone, but it's from this great one Marcus Samuelson did, where he interviewed a bunch of chefs who cook in. This one's called The Rise. And so we got the recipe from there. We heard from some of the chefs that cook it and about how significant black-eyed peas are for African-American foodways and resistance. So yeah, so you can see the black-eyed pea fritters there. And then for West African foodways, we actually had one of our board members come, who's from Nigeria. He's West African, Gordon Halm, and he came, and you can see him here. And he cooked with the students Gari Foto and Kili Wili, which is like a plantain sort of dish. It's amazing to look at kind of those crops and how they have influenced our food system. So those are some examples of some of the food labs that we've done. Here's some other pictures of students. It just make me happy seeing them all cooking in class. You can see them all there. So yeah, next slide. And so then another important part are the cooking lab reflections. So we'll learn content. So we'll learn about indigenous foodways and Three Sisters gardens and things like that. And then they'll have their cooking lab that's connected to that. And then they do a cooking lab reflection. This is one this semester around, it's a more food science one. So they're looking about brown butter versus just regular melted butter, and the Maillard reaction that happens, kind of browning techniques. And they made roasted cauliflower with the brown butter and kind of saw the difference. So they might have a cooking reflection connected to that. You can see that one in the things, but I'm going to share with you one of them. Cool. So when someone is having after the cooking labs, they have a document like this where they have to insert pictures of their meal. And this is modified from, and the first time I do this, I give credit, and then we do it a bunch, so you don't see it as much here, but Edible Schoolyard, some of this text here. But so they put a picture of their meal, And then the senses and curiosity. So they have to think about, like, did you like how it looked, how it tasted? What would you modify if you do it differently? Connections and challenges. What did you learn from this process? What are the skills and collaboration? What do you want to remember? What do you want to practice for next time? And then D is kind of the class connections. Why did we cook this dish? How does it connect to our first unit? And that's really assessing their connections to content and terms. We don't have quizzes or tests in this class. It's all project-based or reflection-based. So this part is really important. And then this is their cooking skills. So whenever we have a cooking lab, this is their rubric around food safety, skills and collaboration and self-direction. So you can see those there if that's helpful for anyone who doesn't, or if you already do cooking labs, I'd love to see yours and modify or beg, borrow, steal, those sorts of things. So that's there if it's helpful for you. But for every time they cook, they do one of those. I want to see, I think I included a example. Again, this one isn't kind of the things that we are currently talking about in the unit, but it is actually we can talk about this one. There's another one on the doc I just shared with you, but this is, we did the diversified farming. So this is a frittata that they did. All of the food come from a farm, a diversified farm. So we learned about it. And then this is Kern's cereal, which is a really cool, promising perennial grain out west that's in development. So they got to taste a cereal that had that. And these are some from different students' reflections, if you want to take a look, just to get a sense of what some students are writing about that's there. Okay, and just in case you're like, how are we able to do this? I thought it was helpful to see our bell schedule. So our classes are about 75-80 minutes. So that's a good chunk of time. I think it would be harder if you have a shorter time. It's definitely doable, but maybe some of these recipes, you'd pick different recipes, and I'd be happy to help anyone and coach anyone on those. I'm sure maybe you have knowledge about that as well. But our class meets C block. So I usually do my cooking labs first thing on Thursdays, because they'll come in and there's this buffer. So if sometimes cleaning does take a while. So if we ever roll over, then I have this protection here. But my goal is to get them in, get them set up, do their lab, eat it, enjoy it, and clean up before we leave class. So that's always a fun adventure. Next slide. I don't think we have time right now for a cooking room tour, but if anyone's interested in coming to the school, I'd be happy to kind of show what we have and how we do it and think about equipment and things like that. Or I could do a Zoom at a different time if people are interested in that part. Next slide. Okay, the other thing I want to share that is a big key piece of our class is journals. Again, I told you students don't take tests or quizzes, and reflection is a really big piece. So they have a journal. If you look in the document I shared with all the resources, and I can put this in the chat as well, you'll see the prompts. I'm highlighting it right now. I don't know if you can see that on the doc. It says Journal for Sustainable Food Systems. These are some of the prompts that we use, and I change them all the time. So I'm already unhappy with some of them, but they're there. If you could share that doc that I just put in. For the journals, you can kind of see the requirements, and they can write them, or they can do audio recordings and videos. I haven't had anyone take me up on the audio or video yet, but perhaps at some point. And there's kind of two, I break them into chunks. There's connecting entries, and those are ones where we haven't explored content yet. So I'm not assessing them on their integration of kind of vocab and key concepts and things like that. It's just give us some examples to connect us, like your personal response. So you can see those. And so I highlight those in green. And then the ones in orange, those are applying. I want them to apply and show that they have made some connection or thinking differently or more deeply about our content. As you can see in bold, like you need to show use of vocab. You need to give examples from experiences from class that are making you think about this. And so those are in orange. And so if you scroll down, you'll see different prompts and different dates. You can kind of go through here. It might give you a sense of where we are in the curriculum at different times. They're highlighted so they know, oh, I got to make sure I'm connecting to the vocab, or, oh, this is just like my own personal experience without that piece yet. So you can see, like, for instance, on 1019, this is when we've learned a lot about kind of, the history of racism and tensions around land use in our country. And so they have to pick some of these quotes and respond to them. in response to that. So you can see that there. So this is here if you want to use it. And then at the very end, I have the rubrics if it's helpful for you. So you can see a bunch of those there. Yeah, thank you for scrolling like this. So you can see here's an example. If you just pause there of the rubrics and kind of, what I'm looking for. Are you making connections to and between class content? Are you providing specific examples and those sorts of things? So that's there if it's helpful for anybody in terms of using journals. I really like using that approach to checking students' understanding. You can see that there. Okay, if you can go back to the slides. I gotta get rolling, I guess. I have too many slides. Okay, I'm not going to go through every unit, and you'll see some of the units on the resource I gave you. I gave you a lot about our current food system. I gave you a lot about the history and things like that. I haven't given a lot about the food access and things like that. I'm just not that organized yet, and I will get there, and I'll make sure those are in there for you. But just wanted to show you and get to kind of food access stuff, some of the projects that students really enjoyed. This one was a challenge they had in groups where they were given and learned about different food programs and access and aid. And so we learned about SNAP, and the challenge was, okay, you're a family now of 4, here's your budget with SNAP, and you also need to eat sustainably, like based off of the things in the class. And so they had to plan a menu around that, price everything out, and then we picked some of them and cooked them. So that was our food labs for one of the projects. In the next slide. This is just to kind of show some of the final projects. Again, I'll drop more resources and links into it later, but they had to pick either a solution to address food waste or food packaging waste in our school or in our town. And they had to pitch ideas for that and do some research, talk to people. We had guest speakers from Tingsboro, the sustainability committee, from a composting company near us, which is so awesome, Offbeat Composting. So we had a lot of folks come in and kind of share to help inform that project. So I'll put more resources in there later. Next slide, please. Cool. And then just quickly, I want to say, we talked about the food waste and packaging. These are some previous students doing a food waste audit. We wanted to kind of explore how we can cook food and help, make change and support folks. So we did as a class, after they learned all the cooking skills, we made soup and we sold it to staff as a fundraiser and the community, our whole community. They picked Ukraine. So went to the Worldwide Community Kitchen. I might be saying that wrong. I can't remember totally. But that was a fundraiser. And then the plant sale, which I'll talk about briefly. Next slide, please. Here's a picture of the soup sale. It's pretty great. So those are some of the students. Okay, so semester 2, again, I'm not going to highlight on too much. The curriculum is a little, saying meshing the 2 classes together has been a little bit interesting, particularly second semester. But one of the major things that we have focused on is, as our guiding question, is how can we put on a successful plant sale for our community? So they had to learn everything about how to plant seeds, how to pick seeds, growing, those sorts of things. They took care of the plants. They picked the kind of plants we were going to grow in our plant stands here at school. So you can go to the next slide. You'll see some pictures from that. So we have a greenhouse. You can see people doing stuff in class. So they labeled it, they took care of it, they had to water them, all that good stuff. And then what was really exciting is I challenged them to pick a nonprofit that they think donating all the proceeds to would have an impact on making a more just and sustainable food system. And so on the next page, you'll see these are the ones that students picked, and then they voted. They had to give pitches in class to vote on the one that they wanted the funds to go to. 100% of the proceeds, people just had to donate a penny, because we want everyone to have access to food in our community as well, and grow plants and pay it forward. But 100% of the proceeds went to that group. And so the class picked Soulfire Farm in New York, which is with awesome Leah Penniman. She's so cool. And she has this book, if you haven't checked it out, Farming While Black, which I highly recommend. All the proceeds went to there. So we just had that last week, and the students raised over $600 for them, which is really cool. And some of the responses for them was like, wow, I didn't know people were so into plants, and they had no idea they'd raise that amount of money. So it was pretty exciting. So next page. Yeah, so that's kind of this year. And so we think about next year, next steps. I'm really excited in this, really solidifying food systems education in our school, and making it legit as a piece of curriculum. Hopefully this will happen. It's still tentative, is that we learned that at Middlesex Community College, we could potentially get dual enrollment credit for students. So college credit in high school for food systems, super cool. This is the description that they have there. It's in the sociology department or psychology department. And I was looking at this with our college counselor. I was like, we do all of these things in our class. I think we could do this. So we're pursuing that right now. And I'd be happy to talk to other folks about that as well. But that's kind of next down the line is let's get college credit for doing this. So that's there. Okay. Whew. That's what I got for you, my friends. Thank you so much for listening to my rambles and excitement. What questions do you have for me? How can we connect?
Wow, Anna.
I know, I'm sorry, I'm kind of overwhelming.
No, it was unbelievable. So my head is like spinning in a good way. How incredible this class. I mean, I was just so envious listening. I want to be a student in this class. So if people have questions, you can, just turn your mic on, put your camera on, or you can put them in the chat. And we have some time for that. People are speechless.
Yeah, we'll go with that. You can even just say hey. We can unmute. Cool.
I'll say hey, and
Thanks.
and that's amazing work because you're really doing this thing from scratch. And one of the things I was wondering is how transferable do you think a lot of the things you're doing would be with younger students, be it middle school or late elementary also?
Oh, I think this can be done at every level. I think a lot of, particularly that first unit, mapping your food system, a snack, and then like picking something. If you delve into it, we do the potato because our students love French fries and it's just the perfect food. And
Who doesn't? Yeah.
about it. Yeah, right. Someone must not, but like there's access points. I'd be happy to talk to you about. I think even looking at kind of the history of land use and enslavement, like I think we need to have those conversations younger. I think that's important. And I think there's ways to do that in ways that make sense developmentally for kids at different levels. But yeah, these cooking labs, these things, I mean, there's nonprofits that do this all the time with kids, just in different ways. So I know it can be done. And I know there's lots of examples we can look at, but I'd be happy to connect with you and look at how we could modify it for what grade level do you work with?
I'm actually, I've been on school committees here in town and
Okay.
regional school committee. So my interest in curriculum comes from that, and also just in general in terms of food policy. But it's one of those things where I'd like to reach out to some of our teachers locally and see what kind of interest there is.
Yeah, I'd be happy to come and connect and show resources, whether it's mine or other people's, and kind of how you'd modify it. No, that would be exciting. Rowan, how many students are in the class? So right now there are 20 students in the class. For me, like as one person, that's kind of, I said to the school, this is what I feel safe that I can manage in cooking groups. So 5 groups of 4 without being worried. So I could probably do 24, but I think that's where I am right now. Do I have ability to share your curriculum with other states or schools? You're welcome to share what's in there with whoever. Again, my disclaimer, I tried to best to credit folks that I've modified things or learned things from in workshops. But I'm a working teacher on the ground, so we do the best we can. But then we gotta like use stuff and get moving. So you're welcome to do that. I'm trying to practice this because like that like brings my anxiety level up, right? That idea, that mantra. I don't know who came up with this. Was it progress, not perfection, right? Because there's so many things I will change about these. So yeah, go for it, Kim. and make them contact me on how they're using it and how to make it better. Yeah. The other thing I'll share is this doc here. I just put it in there. It has the link to the resources that I was telling you about that you all have. Some of the thing, it has a program of studies excerpts. Again, I think that's helpful, like when you're talking to admin or boards and stuff like that, to kind of see the progression or to see classes and course catalogs. It's kind of hard to write descriptions sometimes. So to have those to glean or use, I think is helpful. The dual enrollment description from the community colleges there, that's helpful to connect with. some of the things that aren't in, because this is from the fry bread resources, and kind of the lessons on that is there as well.
Anna, I have a question.
Yeah.
Well, it's not always that people get to teach their passion.
I
right?
know.
And it really, and also to get the administrative support to teach their passion.
Yeah.
And it's obviously clear that you're teaching your passion, and you're also getting support from your school to do that, which is just incredible. Any teacher on here knows this is not the norm.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious about your background. Like, when did this become your passion? And like, was this always? And like, when you were studying in the education department, like, was this your passion, or did this grow and suddenly you realized, wow, I get to actually have freedom in my school to teach something that I'm really interested in, and how this evolved?
Yeah. Oh, wow.
That
That's a big question. I mean, I've always been passionate about nature and food and gardening. My undergrad is actually, I was going into environmental science and forestry, and I actually moved away from that and ended up doing communication and culture studies, and thought I was going to go into journalism and all sorts of things. And like, gardening was kind of always this thing that was there. I ended up going to grad school for environmental science, and we started a community garden project there. I don't know why I never connected. Like, I knew I was going to do garden projects within my classes, but I never connected it like that. It itself could be a class, right? Like, I know there's botany classes or things like that, but this feels a little bit different. It feels like it's a mashup of a bunch of things that exist, right? We have nutrition classes. When I was in middle school, we had home ec, and in some states, we don't have home ec now, but there's family and consumer science, right? Which is hitting on some of these things. We have all of these things that have elements of it, but I guess I never thought that you could teach a class in this way. Wow, I just rambled on.
Yeah, well, your students are so lucky, and this, to me, I mean, this class should be like a model. I mean, your students are so lucky, and it's also sad for students who are not at your school, who are not getting to experience this, because really it seems just like a brilliant model for all schools.
I agree. And so I can't remember. I apologize no, she's gone. Bethany or Brittany, and the work that they're doing to kind of capture these stories, and then start to advocate for this to be in the standards. Like, this needs to be in the standards. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. So when my interest in gardening, I was like, okay, gardening is a good way to learn science, right? Like, we can learn lots of science concepts through gardening. And that's kind of how my brain had been approaching things. But then as I started to teach that class, I think I shared at the beginning, was very, very science, like, and there's science throughout it, but there wasn't these other like cultural, historical, and all of these arts and other pieces. And I think when I took that class the summer, that was approaching it from, this is a racial justice, social justice issue, we need to approach it from this way, and that piece. And it really became like, I can teach gardening as a way to learn science, but like, we should just learn this on its own. Like, it's this legit thing on its own that we should be learning. And I think that shifted things for me a lot about kind of my passion for this particular way, because I think there's so many people doing great stuff with gardening, like so many, like, it's very inspiring, but this feels a little bit different to me than that is like, this is legit on its own. It's not just an avenue to learn science. It's an avenue that we all should be learning.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any last questions before we all sign off? Anna has shared a lot of resources in the chat, so make sure you pull anything that you would like. And
Also dropping in my email again, because I'm not kidding. Like, I need friends to talk to these things about and connect with, and I'd love to help. So there's my email. Please connect with me. Be my friend.
Great. Well, if there are no other questions, oh, and then Lisa just put in the, I'm sorry, in the chat, there's a evaluation of the workshop. So if everyone could fill that out before they head out. And if you're looking for something great to do this weekend, check out our field trips from Boston all the way to the Berkshires.
Yeah, the interns and I, we're going to go to Red's Best on Friday. We're really excited. Yeah.
And thank you so much.
Cool. All right, everyone, don't be strangers.